There is a major problem that Russia appears to be facing as the conflict in Iran evolves from something that could be described as a special military operation into a full-fledged war. And the fascinating thing is that we really do not know how much of a problem that it is. It is almost certainly some kind of problem, but whether this is the type of thing that will break one of the Kremlin's key campaigns, or only be a minor inconvenience, is up in the air, figuratively and literally, because the subject for today is the production of Shahed drones. Moreover, the central mystery for today also informs us about a problem that is central to concerns over how a war in the Indo-Pacific might play out. As it turns out, right now, Western companies are racing to be sure that allied nations will never encounter Russia's current issue. Yes, I know that the hot news stories right now related to Russia are focusing on reports that the Kremlin is feeding Iran with intelligence to help fight the United States. Not like that never happened in Afghanistan. How soaring oil prices may give Russia's treasury enough fuel to prolong the invasion of Ukraine yet further, and relaxation of secondary sanctions against India for importing Russian oil. And do not get me wrong, those are fascinating stories. In fact, I am sure that we will return to the Strait of Hormuz soon. However, our hidden story for today is the production of Shahed drones, a weapon common to both battlefields of our current world at war. Rewind to February 2022 and the start of the invasion of Ukraine. Back then, Russia was not using the one-way attack drones as we know them today. But as autumn fell on the country and the war began to drag, Moscow started importing Shahed drones from Iran. And if you think that I'm about to say that the Iran war is a problem for Russia because Iran will terminate those exports, nope, that is not it. The problem is subtler. You see, a few years ago, the arrangement was one of technological necessity. Even after the 2014 annexation of Crimea, Russia was not truly shut out of global supply chains. As a result, whatever Moscow needed to build its bombs that it could not bother to produce itself, it imported from the same places that the rest of us might. That worked until the invasion began, Western sanctions rained down, and the Russian military soon found itself short on munitions. If you ever wondered why the Kremlin became so friendly with North Korea and Iran after the invasion, this is why. It is not merely that they would continue to trade with Russia. Many other countries were willing to as well. It is that they were willing to trade with Russia and had experience building weapons outside of Western supply chains. Not too long thereafter, Russia reached a licensing deal on the Shaheds. Rather than import the drones from Iran, Moscow could put Russian industrial power to work, producing them domestically for a fee. On the surface, reducing the Kremlin's vulnerability to supply disruptions coming from Iran. That said, how this operates in practice is unclear to us keyboard warriors. Maybe the CIA knows, but they are keeping quiet. Hence the mystery that opened today's video. We know that Russia literally has factory floors that output Shaheds. Whether that qualifies as Shaheds made in Russia is up to interpretation, though. What we know for sure is that Russia is not producing them from the ground up. It still relies on supply chains to source various inputs for the drones. The bulk of these input goods come from China, perhaps not a big surprise given that China is the world leader in drone production. Some of the parts, like German transistors, are still sourced from Western countries through third parties and black market schemes. Whenever you hear news stories of the ever-evolving layers of economic sanctions due to the war, this is why. In cat-and-mouse games, the mouse always comes up with a new solution, and the cat has to counteract it. What is less clear is how much Russia still relies on Iran in particular. Given that Tehran has years more experience producing Shaheds, it would not be surprising to learn that Russia outsources some of its more difficult parts to Iran, and then assembles the final product at home. Then there is a strategic reason why Iran may have mandated this in the licensing agreement. Stop me if you have heard this before, but there is no third-party enforcement of contracts in international relations. You could imagine that one day Putin approaches you and says, "Hey, we would really like your Shaheds, but you do not have the capacity to build as many as we need. Why don't you just show us how to build them, and then we will pay you a fee every time we make one for ourselves?" Sounds great. You just sit there and make money. So you send your tech teams to Russia and train the locals. Fast forward a few months, and you check your bank account. And look at that. All of your promised deposits have gone up in smoke. You appeal to the Kremlin, but all you hear is a runaround. What Shaheds? What licensing deal? And that is the problem. Once Russia knows how to build them on its own, there is no reason to pay the promised licensing fees. In a domestic setting, this would not be a problem. Just go to court and sue. You will win. And that inevitability deters your business partner from betraying you in the first place. Unfortunately for Tehran, that sort of enforcement system just does not exist in international relations. Well, one way to protect against this problem is to show Russia how to produce 90% of the drone, but withhold a particularly complicated 10%. That way, if Russia ever tries to break the deal, you can simply blank all of their Shaheds. Seems like a great solution to the problem, and Russia has to go along with it, because otherwise Iran would veto the deal. Or at least it is a great solution until the Ayatollah's regime is suddenly crumbling into dust. Furthermore, the problems that Operation Epic Fury may be causing for Russia are worse here than they seem. It is not just that Russia runs out of that particular part. It is that the entire production line becomes worthless as a result. Again, to credibly enforce Russia's licensing payments, Iran needed the ability to brick Russian-produced Shaheds. So everything that Russia has invested in all of those other components becomes temporarily worthless. I say temporarily because presumably Russia will immediately put together a team to manufacture a solution. However, a second problem arises here. The war in Ukraine is a cycle of innovation and response. It is possible that by the time that Russia gets its assembly lines up and running again, Ukraine has a way to beat the current model. Russia then has relative junk in its inventory, and will need to either modify them or accept that their best use is as bait. Now, I have to place the appropriate caveats here. Again, we do not know if Iran structured the licensing agreement in a manner that kept it critical to Russia's supply chain. Even if Tehran wised up here, we also do not know whether Moscow anticipated the vulnerability that it created, and kept a contingency plan in case Iran experienced a disruption. Because certainly no one could anticipate that while multiple carrier strike groups were headed to the region. On top of that, we do not know for sure whether Iran has lost production capacity, though certainly such facilities would have been high on the US targeting list. Remember, the entire US defensive strategy is predicated on proactively destroying Iran's ability to launch drones and ballistic missiles. And it may be a while before we observe any clear difference in Russia's strike rates. There will still be lingering inventory that Russia can go through. However, planners will want to start reducing nightly launches to save the remaining fleet for higher priority targets when they arise. Zooming out, the most striking thing to me about this situation is that it parallels a problem that the West has with its own supply chains should World War III break out. Actually, this has been an active concern of mine for months now. So much so that at the end of December, I went to the airport, got on a plane, and flew to California to visit Neros Technologies, one of the leading companies working on a solution. You might remember this as the place where my illustrious career as a drone pilot came to an early and tragic end. What a shame. And you know what? I was so intrigued by the problem that I even recorded an introduction to a video specifically on the topic. So humor me, and let's all pretend that we are starting a brand new video right now. Take it away, past Will.
Welcome to Neros Technologies. Each month, the factory here produces about 2,500 of these, Archer FPV drones, a little under half of which go to battlefield use in Ukraine. However, it is not what they produce, rather how they produce them that is interesting, because they're trying to solve a major problem that everyone in the West currently faces.
All I had to do was return home, edit the thing together, and post it. Certainly 2026 would afford me the opportunity. Well, then we had a special Maduro operation, whatever you want to call that Greenland thing, me heading very far north to investigate the Arctic security environment, still gotta get to that video, and now an Iran war. It has been 2 months since I have slept, but apparently that is an optional feature of the human body. Who would have known? Well, thanks to the potential issue with Russia's supply chain, now we can finally get back to the Western drones. The major problem with the drones that Ukraine uses, including Western drones manufactured outside of Ukraine, is that they have components made in China. This could range from some of the very basic plastic wedges to more complicated parts like microchips that operate the controls. Aside from the problems that might arise if Beijing ever decides to take its limitless friendship with Moscow seriously, there is a clear issue further east. Presumably, Taiwan and the United States would want a whole bunch of drones to fire at the PRC once a war along the Taiwan Strait begins. But Beijing could just cut the Western supply chains, and then there goes that plan. Even if the proximate causes are unique, it creates the same problem that Russia may be looking at due to Iran's involuntary termination of shipments. Moreover, as we explored a couple of months ago, you cannot just stockpile the drones for later, because technological advancements are rapid enough that they start losing value once they hit the shelf. Now, Western governments are aware of the problem and are working towards solutions. Hence Latvia's formation of the Drone Coalition, specifically formed to address the stability of supply chains. Just as the United States worries about cuts due to Indo-Pacific tensions, European countries need to shore up this vulnerability for themselves and Ukraine. Individual governments are also working on their own projects and are willing to subsidize the process, because cutting China out of the mix inevitably leads to a more expensive product, and companies will not be able to survive without those subsidies. This is not an easy process. Let me walk you through Neros' experience as a small startup of former drone racers, realizing that they could make their mark on the military side of things. What you are seeing now is the Neros Alpha drone, produced in September 2023. It had China's fingerprints all over the production, because 2 people building a first run of 30 drones cannot revolutionize supply chains. Fast forward to Bravo in February 2024, and the motherboard flipped to US production. Then Charlie, 4 months afterward, began the process of shifting to all non-Chinese components, while also refocusing its design for larger manufacturing processes. Skipping past some experiments and prototypes, Hotel in January 2025 did not have any critical components sourced from China, though it still had some Chinese raw carbon fiber, copper, and USB connector parts. The reason for the reduced but continued Chinese sourcing is bandwidth. You can only exert so much effort looking for Western components, and so it makes sense to prioritize onshoring the bigger pain points first. That way, in an emergency, you can quickly find solutions to the easier parts. Back to the hotel, some of its alternative sourcing raises another broader problem that the West faces here. This drone's radio chip and motors come from Taiwan. That is fine for a situation where, say, Beijing cracks down on some move that NATO makes in Europe and imposes serious export bans on anything that could go into a drone. It is much more problematic if the PRC invades Taiwan, and suddenly access to Taiwanese exports also vanishes. And then there is the more general problem of input products of input products. Even if all of your orders come from Western companies, it is difficult to ensure that the lower-tier manufacturers do not use Chinese inputs for their outputs. At that point, Beijing implementing an export ban shuts down drone manufacturing all the same. One important difference between Russia's current problem and the challenges that Western drone startups face is the financial ability to weather a hiccup in the supply chain. In all likelihood, the Kremlin so heavily subsidizes Russian Shahed producers that any financial problems due to a temporary freeze in production will not put them at risk of bankruptcy. In contrast, Western drone startups have very thin margins. They also have cages of inventory containing various parts of the drones. If a single component is no longer available, then those cages of parts turn into illiquid assets with next to zero effective value until the missing component returns. But regardless of whether we are talking about the Western coalition or the Chinese-led counter-coalition, the cliché remains true. Amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics. And for Russia today or the West in the future, getting the supply chains right is the key to victory. Thanks to Neros for their hospitality. Their ceiling paid a dear price. Meanwhile, if you want to learn more about what is happening in Iran, check out this playlist on the broader conflict. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Take care.